Welcome back to Yahoo Finance. As we continue to learn more about the COVID-19 coronavirus, one of the questions that's still out there is why China tolerates animal markets that produce deadly viruses. And Rick Newman has been looking into this. Rick, this continues to be something that people point out. What did you find?
This is not about vilifying China the way President Trump does. It's just a basic question. Since this is obviously a problem, this is not the first time we've had a terrible virus come out of these live animal markets in China. Why does China allow these markets to operate anyway? And the answer is kind of complicated, as with many things, but it basically comes down to there just is a lot of demand in China for wildlife and access to live animals in these markets. It comes from consumers who have been eating these kinds of animals for decades, literally. And this goes all the way back to the famines that occurred in China after the communists came to power in 1949. And then there's the Chinese pharmaceutical industry, traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, which has been relying on animal parts to go into some of these traditional remedies literally for centuries or longer. So this is just a very strong form of demand in China. And if China were to make these markets illegal, they would just pop up on the black market. It would just end up as unregulated or even less regulated than it is now. China's not the only country that has live animal markets like this. A lot of Asian countries do. There's also some of this in Africa and Latin America. And it's just a tougher problem to deal with than it seems like.
So basically, I mean, it's better to keep it this way than, as you said, drive it underground.
But, you know, China has tried to do things. They've tried to limit it to farmed wildlife. So there are now breeders in China who raise certain types of animals. So at least there's some regulation of the breeding. They have tried to stop the sale of certain types of animals, whether it's bats or pangolins or something else. And they, you know, one of the things is to limit the number of different types of animals you have together, because the more species you have together, the closer they are, the higher the risk that viruses are going to jump from one species to another and then to humans. You know, so you could separate them out. You could have rules that require fewer animals in one place and just ride hard on it. You know, after SARS, the SARS outbreak in 2003, China banned some of the animals they thought were responsible for that, but only for a couple of months. And then it just went back to the way it was. So China has tried to put some new rules on these markets, but a lot of people don't think they're going to stick.
I do think it's important to kind of keep this conversation in context. So, and the only reason I mention it is because I've heard the conversation about the illegal wildlife trade lumped into the broader wet markets that we see exist all around China as well as all around Asia. And one of the concerns of a lot of these governments is that that is the one source or affordable source of food for a lot of locals. And so, you know, for China, it really is about cracking down, especially on regulation, but also hygiene. Because even if you allow these markets, you know, they have banned it since February, but we've seen them pop up, as Rick mentioned, in previous outbreaks before, and they simply haven't regulated the wildlife trade. And the concern is when you shut everything down, then you shut down the source of food for people who are not purchasing that.
That's true. You're right. There's some confusion over the terminology here. I mean, a wet market is basically considered to be a market where where food products are sold, where there could be live
basically a farmer's market.
Yeah, live or butchered animals, but also produce and things on ice. That's one of the sources of the wet. The distinction here is really wildlife, and especially live wild animals that are sometimes sold live and sometimes butchered right on the spot. And the other thing here is this is actually, I mean, this is a meaningful part of the economy in China. This is not a trivial part of the economy, especially in some rural areas. I mean, we're talking about people's livelihoods. We're talking about local politicians looking out for the interests of people in their region, could be mayors. You know, the further you get outside the big cities, the more local provincial officials have control. Bribery, I'm sure, is also a factor here. So it's not nearly as simple as a lot of people think, which is why can't the government in Beijing just shut down all these markets? They really can't.
Yep. Nothing is ever as simple as you think. Rick Newman on the case there.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.